Welcome, my friends, to this module. Today, in this module, I'm going to be speaking to the gentleman who helped us architect our press conference, who helped us architect a lot of the strategy that Defend Florida used. And when it comes down to looking at how come a team of volunteers was able to mount a conversation, an argument, compel our senior leaders in Tallahassee to do the things that the people in Florida, wanted them to do. When it comes to figuring out how to do that, you're going to see how we got that. The answer to the question, how did we at Defend Florida do all of that, comes from the gentleman named John Jaggers. John has been working with Defend Florida right from the beginning, and I'm very, very pleased to have him on the show today with us in this particular training module. John, thank you for being with me. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you so much, Raj, for the kind words. And to the audience out there, uh, thank you for signing up for Defend Florida. You've joined an organization, whether you know it or not, that is nationally recognized, that has a lot of attention, has a lot of eyes on it, and the performance that's been delivered by Defend Florida has caught a lot of people's attention. That's great. And with good attention and a lot of eyes on you, it also means it's time to up your game because while you've got a lot of people cheerleading you, you're going to have a lot of people who want to take any little mistake you make and exploit it and tear down that which you've built. So, this module is designed to get a mindset that enables you to be not just an effective volunteer, but a highly professional volunteer who garners respect throughout the state of Florida, in a state legislature, and quite frankly, nationally.
Thank you, John. And this is why you can tell that this module is really, really important. And to get things started, for those of you who do not know who John Jaggers is, John, could you share maybe for a minute or two a little bit about your background and then get right into the course material?
Sure. So I started very much like many of you back when President Obama was being elected, and we had John McCain as the Republican candidate. Excuse me, I'll mute my ever present phone. When John McCain was running for president and Sarah Palin was his vice presidential candidate, I just went out and knocked doors. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where to go. I went to my local Republican Party. They gave me a bunch of papers. They gave me this thing I didn't know what it was called a walkbook. And I just went and knocked where they told me to. And with that, that was my start. Not long after that, the Tea Party came into being. And I was one of the original Tea Party members in Reston on a rainy day. And I remember that experience vividly because there were hundreds of people on a Reston field in Northern Virginia at a park, handmade signs. I have pictures of it. My kids were there with me. And then from there, I got more and more involved, learned good lessons, hard lessons, candidly got my teeth kicked in a few times, at least metaphorically, and finally learned enough that I was recruited by the Trump campaign to be one of the originals. I started with the president's campaign in August. January, I was brought on payroll, and my assignments were to win the primary delegate battles in Virginia and Maryland initially. I handled a lot of other issues going forward. Not long after that, obviously, I was part of transition. I was a Trump appointee, and you can Google me and you'll see how the press treated me. It was kind of an interesting experience. And after the election of 2020, got very involved with election integrity issues. And that's how I came to be part of Defend Florida. So if you would look at me as a model of volunteerism, knowing nothing, to basically having in-depth delegate fights and being essentially the political director for one of the more successful volunteer organizations, Defend Florida.
And this experience, this breadth of experience that John has, a lot of you can relate to the first part of his career as a volunteer, not knowing a lot. And that is both that a lot of us fall into. But John has moved beyond that and he has upgraded his understanding. He has sharpened his focus and he is understanding how to build an effective mindset. And so this is going to be a very, very important lesson, very important module. Please listen up, take notes. You're going to want to watch this a couple of times, and you want to implement the ideas and principles that John says and shares with us. So, John, take it away.
Sure. Thank you for that, Raj. So, folks, the first thing about being a successful volunteer is you've got to have some passion for a couple of issues that really you care about. In my particular case, the passion started with very simply, I didn't like the direction that the Democrat Party was taking the country. I did not like the taxation. Did not like the intrusiveness of the federal government into all of our affairs. And that was a pretty simple but relatively unspecific need. Later, as I matured, I realized that some of the problems we were facing were with particular issues. Mine, in my case, was education and fixing the education system. From there, I moved into getting the right candidates elected, and then from there, passionately fighting for election integrity. So the first thing you want to do is find your passion. The examples I'll use are principally around education and election integrity. However, it could be anything. It could be your Second Amendment rights. It could be first. It could be First Amendment rights. It could be Fourth Amendment rights. You have to have an issue you're passionate about. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take your passion and take your energy and give yourself two sets of tools. The first set of tools, you need to work on yourself. Politics is a people business. You are going to be working with people. You're going to be discussing with people. You are going to be challenged by people. So managing people and getting good at that is a very, very important component. And the good thing about this kind of volunteerism and this kind of work, it extends to your business life, it extends to your personal life, and any other activity that you have, because everything that's worth doing involves people. So with that note, the first thing you want to understand about yourself on the people side, what kind of people are you? Are you a direct person? Are you an indirect person? Are you outspoken? Are you soft in the way you like to do things? Understand yourself. A lot of people have taken Myers-Briggs indicators. It's a great way to check yourself out. There's lots of stuff out there like that. The reason you want to understand yourself comes to the next point right here. There are two books that are very famous: Skill with People by Les Giblin and How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. If I had to revisit what I went through and learned and what would have been helpful to me, having more skill with people in the beginning of my volunteerism would have made me a far more effective volunteer. I came by those skills later, and quite frankly, the hard lessons of my own experience. I would save you all that and learn from other people's experience. OPE, other people's experience, is way, way, way better than your experience. So the reason that I want talked about your kind of personality style is if you are a soft person, an indirect person, the How to Win Friends and Influence People book by Dale Carnegie is a great book. And what's great about that book is it starts with a simple thing. Don't kick over the beehive is one of the first early chapters. And that's a good place to start. If you're a more direct person, and even if you're an indirect person, the other book that's very valuable, it's a very thin book. And if you don't have a lot of time, you can start with this one. It's Les Giblin's Skill with People. And in this book, what Les Giblin does is he describes how people truly communicate. And the key to truly communicating is that much of our communication is nonverbal. It's your disposition, it's your demeanor, it's your emotional tone, it's the trust factor an individual has between you and the audience. And for those who are aware of social media, one of the things that we all have to come to grips with is we are all now showmen and showwomen, and we all work to audiences. So having a skill with people, being comfortable meeting people where they're at, is the first foundational brick that comes from being an effective volunteer. The second thing goes back to passion. If you're passionate about education, if you're passionate about election integrity, if you're passionate about the Second Amendment or what have you, and right now we need a lot more people who are passionate about protecting our Fourth Amendment rights. What you want to do is you want to start studying up on the issues that are relevant to your county and state on these various issues. For example, in education, each state handles education differently, and we're all dealing with the impact of transgenderism and essentially teachers inserting themselves between parents and students and taking control where they're not allowed to have control. Well, if you want to fix education, and in many, many other issues you're going to deal with, the name of the game is controlling the funding. And when you're dealing with education, you want to understand how education is funded in your state and what are the levers of power relative to controlling funding. And that's what it comes to being knowledgeable. And there's a wealth of resources to be knowledgeable. And you want to be good at your topic area. And you want to be good, you want to be factually accurate, you want to understate the facts, avoid the hyperbole, avoid outlandish claims, and avoid things that can't be substantiated with original source material. When you're confronted with that, when you combine the skill with people with your passion and knowledge that can be trusted, you now become a skillful, trusted advocate. No matter who you're talking to, you develop that rapport because you've learned how to do that. You've developed trust because you're knowledgeable, and you take your passion, which is visible in the fact that you've taken that energy of passion and honed your skills, and people will see that, respect it, and work with you. Then you're going to come back and hear some things say, but some people don't want to learn. Some people don't have this or that issue. Yes, that's true. The system is highly corrupt. If you think about it, politics controls a lot of power and money. And as the famous story goes about why did the bank robber rob the bank? Well, that's because where the money is. That's because that's where the money is. If you're a power person who's driven by the acquisition of power or the acquisition of money to the exclusion of any other endeavor, politics is a magnet to you. And you're going to have to deal with the fact that there's a lot of corruption there. There's a lot of patriotism there. There's a lot of good people wanting to do the right thing. There's a lot of good people wanting to stop the bad thing. Discernment in understanding who you're working with and what is possible with that person is part of the experiential knowledge you'll get as you go forward and work with people. So you're a new volunteer. The thing that I would do if I was a new volunteer is find a mentor who is passionate in the direction that you're passionate about. Here at Defend Florida, a big part of what we do is all about election integrity. Having said that, we're not exclusive to election integrity, and many of our volunteers are experts or knowledgeable about other issues where your passions may lie. So, welcome to Defend Florida. We're focused on election integrity, clean and fair elections for everybody. And we have lots of people that you can talk to and get connected to on a whole host of issues that make you passionate. So that's the first good thing. So if you're a more experienced person or you're a person who wants to get to the heart of the matter, one of the things you want to do is identify those candidates that share your issue set and you want to start volunteering for them. A door knock, a walk is extremely valuable to a candidate because voters and many statistics have shown, that many voters will vote for a candidate if someone knocks on the door. The general rule, it's a general sales rule. You need 20 interactions to get down to 5 or 6 engagements, and you need 2 or 3 engagements with a person to get them to move the needle on whatever you're trying to sell. So that's just a general sales funnel. Most salespeople and professionals are aware of it, and they don't even think about it anymore. And you as a volunteer will get that way too. When you knock on someone's door, you're creating a lot of engagement, and you're telling that voter you care a lot about them and you care a lot about their opinion and you want them to come to your side. Extremely valuable, and good candidates and good candidate campaign staff appreciate the door knocking volunteer. So that's an extremely valuable thing to do. The next thing you want to do is once you've adopted a candidate and an issue set, you want to seek out ways to get your agenda moving. The way our Constitution is set up, which is something that we're all beginning to relearn, is the founding fathers made state legislatures extremely powerful. The state legislature controls how the president is elected in the Electoral College. The state legislature controls how budgets are allocated in your state. It controls how the school boards operate in your state. Every single thing in your state is subordinate to action of the state legislature. Therefore, state legislatures have an inordinate amount of power and control over how matters are behaved. In Defend Florida, we did something that candidly is very hard to do. We got the state legislature, which is comprised of a House of Delegates, a state Senate, to craft and support new election integrity laws and get those new election integrity laws signed off by a governor. Typically, if you want a new law passed by a legislature, it typically takes 2 to 3 legislative sessions. And what does that mean? A legislative sessions in most states occur from January to some part of the early part of the year, and they meet annually. They adjudicate the budget, they pass whatever laws, then they go back to their professional lives, and then they come back again the following January. So if you don't get your law passed in legislative 2023, then you're going to have to come back in 2024 and work it again. Typically, it takes 2 or 3 years to get a new law passed. And this is very important to understand. If you're volunteering and you're coming to the fight, this is not a fight that's going to happen in one election cycle and then we forget about these folks. This is going to be a multi-year effort. And quite frankly, the people who are subverting our republic have been at it a long time, and they have changed a lot of rules and a lot of regulatory matters to maintain their power. What we need to do is gain power by putting our candidates in the legislature and then help those legislatures pass the laws and regulations that take the corrupt power away from corrupt people and put the right kinds of laws in place. And you've seen that with Defend Florida in our election integrity laws. For example, we got rid of ballot boxes or drop boxes. We've got different rules and different methods for validating votes and registration databases. We have a lot more work to do. We didn't get everything we wanted. Governor DeSantis in Defend Florida did get something he wanted, which is an election integrity law enforcement element. This is one of the first of its kind in the country, and hopefully we can get that adopted nationally. Again, because Defend Florida is watched nationally, things that we do in Florida are going to become a template for other states and hopefully nationally. So that's what you need to kind of think through as you're doing your volunteering. So back to skill with people, how to win friends and influence people. And what I'm going to call this is volunteer professionalism. Our worst political opponent is still a human being with human needs, desires, drives, ambitions, and passions. They may be corrupt. They may be genuinely determined and think that 70% taxation is the right answer and have government allocate resources. Personally, I would disagree with that, but they may have that position. In the persuasion game, to get legislators to pass laws the way you want, you've got to respect their human condition. You've got to work with them. Legislative bodies attract a particular type of person. Legislative bodies attract people who like to do things in groups and teams. An individual legislator is not necessarily an executive. Executives are very comfortable operating as lone wolves or by themselves, making the decisions and accepting the weight and responsibility of those decisions. But legislators are not like that. So as you volunteer and you're working with your state legislatures, where a great deal of the power is, you definitely want to look forward to that and work with teams of legislatures. There may be a leader, they may be a committee chairman, they may be just a very, very trusted individual within that legislature. You want to make that individual a friend and then understand their network and then help them help you. And that's a big part of what's happening here. And candidly, sometimes you're going to cut a political deal. As I came up through the ranks in the Tea Party in Northern Virginia, Frank Wolf was my Congressional District 10 congressman. There's a lot of people who liked Frank. There's a lot of people who did not like Frank, with everything in between. When the Tea Party was going strong, I was one of the individuals who worked with his office extensively. There were things that Frank Wolf did that were fabulous. There were things that he did were very, very counterproductive from a Tea Party perspective. But one thing that Frank and I had was professional respect. If Frank needed a turnout at an event, he knew he could come to us and get a turnout. And it might not have been a Tea Party issue. He was very big on religious freedom around the world. And sometimes he needed people at a rally or at a press conference to show support. And we gave him that support. There were other times where we needed Frank's support to pass a bill or change something or vote a certain way. And he would take a look at the issue and he would tell us hands down if he could support it or not. When he gave his word, he delivered. When he told us he couldn't do it, it was professional. We weren't happy, but we worked with it. And with that relationship, we were able to be successful. And Frank was by no means a Tea Party congressperson. Even to this day, I can go back to Frank and get advice. That's invaluable to you as a volunteer, and you want those kinds of relationships with legislators that are in your reach. And if you're professional, you can get that. If you're an attack dog and they're always horrible and everything is hyperbole and your facts don't check out and your passion is misplaced and misdirected and rent on their staff versus on the member, you're going to find that your effectiveness will go down. When I do a more detailed training and I talk about volunteers, high interpersonal skills and high knowledge are very, very valuable. Low interpersonal skills in the political game are not valuable at all. And what happens is they diminish your effectiveness. So that's a big part of it. The next thing to come to grips with is there's a lot of corruption in our system. There's a lot of bad behavior. There's a lot of people who are part of the system and it's their source of income. And as you change it, you're taking away their income. There are individuals who are identity focused on being great civil servants. One of the things that comes to mind when you're working with people is how they identify themselves is very, very powerful. And when you're attacking or impacting negatively an individual's identity, they're going to fight you more. So you always want to meet people where they're at. The short rule of thumb is identity will will trump emotion. Emotion will trump facts. Facts trump nothing. If you can't relate to them as a person at an emotional or identity level, what facts you present will be largely ignored. You need the facts because when you connect with someone emotionally and they adopt your position and they're emotionally behind you, they'll use the facts to rationalize what they're going to do and their support. And you need that. Likewise with identity. What you'll find is to distract people, they'll engage your emotions. What you want to do as a volunteer is manage your emotions and funnel your passion into effectiveness. Raj, I think that that's a lot for a new volunteer and an experienced volunteer to digest. I'm happy to answer some of your questions or give you some clarifications in more detail. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, John. So, my friends, as we go into the a few questions here, I want to impress upon you how important it is for you to rewind and listen to this a few times. Why? Because if you look at all the stuff you and I are looking at, whether it be Rumble or some of these great publications and newspapers, uh, no one's talking about what John just said. Everyone, it seems, is talking about the newest sensational thing. And at the time of this recording, we had something happen in Mar-a-Lago. We had something happen with the IRS agents. We had something happen with Mr. Biden's speech. Those things are populating all the headlines and grabbing the attention of you and I. While in order for us to get what we want done, we have to be focused on the very specific things that John just talked about. So rewind, listen to this again a couple of times so that it sinks in. So, John, when you're talking about uh, creating a relationship with a legislator, and that legislator will be in the meeting, they'll nod, they'll smile, they'll say, "Thank you very much for being a volunteer. We need more people like you, and I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to look into this and get back to you." And when that legislator doesn't do what they said they would do, a lot of times, I know for myself, I get so disappointed. I get so discouraged. I am thinking, man, it took me all this time to get that meeting. I prepared. He said he was going to do something. She said she was going to follow up, and nothing happened. And we know that that's actually par for the course. But knowing that that happens equips us. So, John, for the people that are yet to experience that, or maybe have experienced that and are now a little turned off, and they are becoming hostile towards those legislators, can you give the folks a little bit more of an advanced way of thinking of what to do next to make sure that they get what they want done, and that it's going to take a little bit more than one meeting?
Copy the question. And and this is a very important element of this to understand. Whether you realize it or not, when you're a political volunteer and activist, you're actually engaged in a sales effort. I know that sounds kind of different from what a lot of people think about. However, you are trying to sell things. The first thing you're selling is yourself to that legislature. They have 24 hours in a day like you. They've only got so much time that they can do their job. So when you get time with that legislator or member of a legislature, you've already scored an important victory. Now, what do you do with the time when they do as Raj suggested? I nickname it the Washington nod. And it's like this: you'll be in a meeting, they'll be nodding. The Washington nod is not agreement. It's an acknowledgement that you sat in front of me and we talked. Just because they're nodding does not mean they're agreeing. They're simply acknowledging. And that's the first thing you have to understand about the Washington or legislative nod. This is acknowledgement. It's not action, and it is not necessarily agreement. When you meet with that legislator and they say, hey, I'm going to look into this, here is a tactical tool for you to use in real time. Thank you very much, Mr. Legislator. I'm so excited about that. Which staff member do I coordinate with to follow up and get more information and address your concerns? And it's very, very important. Which staff member do I talk with? The reason that that's very, very important, I'll take you back to election integrity work in January of 2021 that was being done relative to the Michigan State Legislature. Our Constitution says something very important. It says that legislatures of the states determine how electors are chosen. Even though there's a popular vote in the Constitution, the state legislature can, in fact, override that vote and select the electors for president. That is a matter of law, and it will be adjudicated at some point in the future rather forcefully. That said, it is a matter of constitutional law. So why am I bringing this up? It has nothing to do with volunteering. Well, what we discovered as we were doing our work is we would be talking to legislators, and it comes to find out that in the state of Michigan, the senior member of the legislature, the president pro tem of the Senate, hired a lawyer as staff that had no constitutional law experience and told the legislatures blatantly they had no power over who the state electors are. And in that moment, our team realized that while we were engaging the legislators for effectiveness and we were making progress, we did not engage the right staff members, and all the progress we made with a legislator was undone by the staff. So when you're in front of your legislator and they say, I want to work with you, get the staff member. And that's extremely valuable because now you've boxed them into supporting you and they've got a point of contact. This is a person they work with regularly, and this is a person that they will listen to because that person sees them every day. You got one meeting. If you have a relationship with the staffers and you're helpful and make them look good, they will promote you to the legislator and your effectiveness increases dramatically. Contrawise, if you make the staffer's life miserable, I guarantee you when your phone number or email comes in, it gets dumped in the bit bucket. Raj, does that cover what you're looking for?
Yes, this is the kind of stuff my friend said we just didn't know we didn't know. And this is the type of thing that you want to take into consideration. So what this means is before you show up at that meeting, because you know you made that appointment, look up your legislator. Your website for your legislator typically will have their staff members' names, so you have an idea who that is. And as John said, creating relationships is a multi-pronged affair, and you want to make sure that you are very diligent with who the staff members are because they play a vital role. John, I'd like to ask you another question very similar to that, and that is this. Um, could you give us a sense of perspective about what happens after our meeting? So I'll put it this way. So we did all the hard work to secure the meeting. We went there and we had the meeting. For us, our issue is the only thing in our mind. Our entire world at the moment is revolving around our one issue. We have been working on it for weeks, maybe months. Our whole team is energized about it. We've told our team we're meeting with the legislator. Everyone is excited. However, for the legislator, our issue is not the only one issue they're dealing with. In fact, after we're done with that meeting, there are probably other things that are also taking place. So, could you give a little bit of perspective in terms of what does it take on the legislator side to actually take our concern, prioritize it against all of the other competing concerns they're dealing with? Maybe even give us a perspective of, you know, There are other groups with lobbyists with a lot of money. Maybe it's good money, dark money, whatever. It's money and influence and pressure. So help us understand a little bit about what we are competing with when we bring our issue to the legislator, in terms of what the legislator is able to deal with, because ours is not the only meeting they had that day. Likely they'll have a number of other meetings with other competing concerns.
Understood. This is a perennial problem. Again, I'll just go right back to sales. Uh, you will work very, very hard in sales. You will get the meeting with that client. You'll meet with the decision maker, hopefully the buyer. And when you do that, you're saying, hey, I had a great meeting. Well, if you met with the individual who doesn't control the budget and you met with the individual who doesn't make the decision, all you've done is have a meeting with no effect. So the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is, if you've got a meeting with that legislator, make sure it's a legislative person who shares your interest. That's homework. That's getting knowledgeable. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm going to give everyone the name of a book that I highly recommend. The book is called The Mind of a Strategist. And once again, I'll repeat that: The Mind of a Strategist. And the gentleman who wrote that book is Kenichi Ome. That book is old. It is a management book. It has a lot of applicability to business as it was in 1990, 2000. However, the first couple sections of that book give a lot of guidance on how to break down problems strategically and identify what I like to term leverage points in a system. We live in a world where everything is a network of networks and a system of systems. When you take an action, you're vibrating the network. You're doing something in the system. You're sending a signal, to borrow an electrical engineering term. So, given that that is a first piece you have to understand, let's look at how a legislature is constructed. So, first and foremost, it's geography. Your state is divided into so many Senate districts and so many House districts, and there are voters in each of those districts. Your legislator represents them. If you go to a meeting and you've got nobody from that legislator's district in your meeting, he'll be polite, or she'll be polite, but you don't have any of his voters in the room. So that's the first thing. You've got to know who his voters are and have some of their voters in that room with you. The second thing that you have to realize about a legislature is no one legislator is an expert on anything, and each of the legislators is assigned to a number of committees. There's an education committee, there's a tax and budget committee, there's a law enforcement judiciary committee, and each state does it differently. They have different names. In the state Senate, they're named one way. In the state House, they're named another way. And when you want to get a piece of legislation passed, you've got to get the Senate version of the bill through that committee and the House version of the bill through that committee. They've got to come together. They've got to align, go back to committee, get voted on, come back together, and get sent to the governor for signature. So the idea here is, you need to be very, very aware of the fact that your legislator you're visiting with is a member of a committee. What committees are they a member of? Is it a committee that affects your legislation? Is there something they're trying to get passed that's near and dear to them that you can help with in trade for them taking your idea forward? Because what has to happen is, a law has to be written or drafted. It then has to be submitted to a committee. The committee then looks at it, adjudicates it, edits it, votes on it. It comes out of the committee. It then goes to the body of a whole. So for example, if you're trying to get election integrity laws passed, which we were trying to do, you want to send it to the committee that's responsible for election integrity laws. They have to agree on it, and that's comprised of Republicans, Democrats, and maybe a few third party candidates. They have to agree on it. They have to get it out. Then the entire body has to vote on it, and that's only half the problem. You got to do all this all over again in the House or the Senate version, depending on where you started. Then, when that's all done, they have to come together in a joint committee. In the state of Virginia, it's called crossover day. What that means is the House sends its bills to cross over to the Senate sends its bills to cross over to the House of Delegates, and then they readjudicate everything. And only the bills that come together and have mutually the same language get moved forward for election votes of the body of the whole, the Senate and the House. So that's what you're dealing with. What's happened is that state senator or that House member is now looking at the election docket. Now we enter the issue of time. If you're meeting with that person in November and you're giving that person a version of the legislation you want passed, you have significantly increased your effectiveness because they have the law in front of them, drafted by you. They have plenty of time to meet with people at Christmas parties, holiday parties, and a little bit before the legislative sessions to soft sell it. You have plenty of time to look at the committee that that bill is going to go into and work with other members of the House of Delegates or the Senate to help get that law passed. You have time to organize a press conference. You have time to create political pressure. All that works to your favor. If, on the other hand, the legislative session has started and it's February and they've had fights and arguments and some bitter feelings have been created over a whole slew of other issues that have nothing to do with what you're working on, and you try and get something done in that environment, it's monumentally more difficult. You'll get the meeting, but now the logistics of getting what you want done is increased. And that legislative staffer that we recommended that you become very good friends with, that legislative staffer has to field all the bills that that member has to vote on, has to fend the bills that that legislator once voted on, has to deal with constituent relations, has to deal with requests from the executive branch, and has to coordinate with other staff members to see who's doing what to whom to get stuff done before the legislative session ends, because it's time limited and very short. So that's the busyness that's going on behind the scenes, which again, back to being good friends with that staffer. The staffer, if they're good friends and works with you, can tell you the backstory of what's important, and you can start adjusting your tactics to help advance your objective. Raj, I hope that's what you were looking for. And I hope that frames it for everyone, that they pay attention to the geography, the timing, and the workload that these individuals are under to get your bill passed. You're on mute, Raj.
Thank you. My friends, you're listening to this and you might be in several different mindsets. You might be thinking, "Ah, this is so great. I had no idea. I'm so excited to get this information because now I know how to up my game." That might be you. You might be listening to this and you might be thinking, "Oh, how am I even going to get started? I have no idea even how to go about doing this. This seems like it's going to take so much time and so much effort. I don't even know how I can even squeeze this into my calendar." Or you might be looking at this and saying, "I have just no way. I don't have the skill set. I'm not a patient person. I don't like talking to people. I'm a little shy." You might be or you might be in a whole nother space as you're listening to what John has been sharing. My friends, I want to encourage you. We were in all of those different spaces. We had no experience. We had no relationships. We did not know about the stuff that John's sharing with you about. But as John began to explain this to us, we had a team, and different team members of our team took on different tasks. Two ladies, Shuna and Dee, they started working on the relationships with the legislator aides, and then other members of our team, like Ro, began creating relationships with the actual representative themselves. Another team, like Debbie, started working on the documentation. So it requires team effort. So why am I saying all this? Here's why I'm saying all of this. and I don't mean to be harsh or critical, but it almost doesn't matter where you are in that timeline. There's a place and a role for you to play. And the reason I'm being so direct, my friends, is if you do this, we've got a shot at recovering our country. And if you don't, we don't have a shot. It just comes down to that. So roll up your sleeves, be an American. In American it says ICAN, American, ICAN. Be an American, be an I can. Find other people in your team that can play these roles, and whatever it takes, get it done. Whatever it takes, get it done. Rearrange, collaborate, put your egos aside, put your personality differences aside, and get this done. So I'm going to ask John here in a minute just to wrap this whole thing up with some closing comments. But before I bring him on, I want you to know that this is doable. Why do I say that? Because we did it, and we didn't have any of this training when we started. You have got the training. You've got someone like John sharing this with you right now. So you are in a place to empower, you're in a place to accelerate, you're in a place to collaborate, and you're in a place to work strategically because you know how the game is played, because you just listened, you just heard it explained to you right now. So, John, thank you for everything you've shared. Before we close, if you have any comments that you could share to conclude and wrap this whole session up.
Yeah, I think I want to echo what Raj had to say there. Each of you as a volunteer has skills. Each of you has a personality style and an approach to how you do business. Each of you has a depth of knowledge that candidly no one else has. The legislators, the fair minded ones, they're not your enemy. They're your representatives. Some are good, some are bad. There's also another avenue here to keep in mind. We've talked a lot about the legislature, but if you're a direct personality, there's a place for you to work with the executive branch. And one of the things you do, all the rules still apply. How to meet them, where get to know them, get to know their staff members, all of those things. What you're asking people to do is pass a law. However, underneath of laws, once a law is passed, regulations are created. Once regulations are created, procedures and policies are created. Another avenue of your effectiveness can be working with the executive branch to implement better regulations with existing laws, which is a little bit faster process. So if you're the type of person who wants to move quick, you can do this alternatively. We said in the beginning that this is a multi-pronged effort. It's a multi-year effort to be effective. It's incredibly rewarding. You will have a lot of fun. You will be stunned at the people you meet. You'll be excited at some of them, frustrated by others. I will tell you, it has benefited me and my family by being involved in the Tea Party. We've been there since 2008, and I have seen things in politics and in my country's development that I would have never gotten that opportunity had I not taken the first step to be basically a very, very incompetent door knocker who didn't know what to say, didn't know how to handle a negative word, didn't know which doors to knock, to go to a point where I can provide advice directly to very senior members of various components of our government, to legislators, and to one of the most outstanding volunteer organizations in the country, Defend Florida. So please come aboard, accept the challenge, and let's get to work. Hey, Raj, you're on mute again.
Thank you, John. My friends, again, listen to this recording again, rewind it, play it back, play it to your group. Your group and your team need to upgrade, just like we need to upgrade. We all need to upgrade the caliber and effectiveness of what we're doing. John, I just can't thank you how valuable this was. I so appreciate it. And I look forward to talking with you again very soon. Have a great day, John.
Thank you, Raj. Talk soon.